Hey everyone, and welcome back to Western Flavors. Before we begin our new episode, let's recap the jaw-dropping events from our last story. The beautiful wedding between Amy and Nathan was brought to a crashing halt by Jack's furious interruption, followed by the dramatic arrival of a battered and bloody Caleb, who collapsed after delivering a cryptic warning. The story ended on the biggest cliffhanger in Heartland history, as a mysterious bearded stranger walked out of the woods, revealed himself to the stunned crowd, and a shocked Amy whispered his impossible name. Ty? If you missed that incredible action-packed story, the full playlist is linked for you in the description below. If you're enjoying this new season, please take a second to hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a chapter. Now today, the reunion we have all been waiting for finally happens. The name, her husband's name, was a fragile, questioning whisper on Amy's lips. It was a sound of such profound, impossible hope that it seemed to hang in the stunned, silent air of the wedding clearing. The man who was Ty Borden looked at her, his own face a mask of a deep, sorrowful, and all-consuming love, and he gave a single, almost imperceptible, and heartbreakingly real nod. It was him. The final, rational, self-protective wall in Amy's mind. The wall that had been screaming at her that this was a dream, a hallucination, a grief-induced madness, did not just crack, it was obliterated. The 4 long years of her carefully constructed new reality, of her life as a widow, of her slow, painful, and hard-won peace, were all rendered meaningless in this one single, beautiful, and catastrophic moment. She moved. It was not a conscious decision. It was a primal, instinctual, and unstoppable reaction, the act of one soul recognizing its other half. She ran. Her beautiful, elegant wedding gown, the symbol of a future that was now a dead and forgotten thing, was a clumsy, heavy weight, its pristine white hem dragging through the dirt. But she didn't care. She ran, her own sob finally breaking free, a sound of such profound, devastating, and joyous heartbreak that it seemed to rip the very air apart. She crashed into him with a force that almost sent them both to the ground. Her arms wrapped around his neck, her hands tangling in his long, matted hair, her body clinging to his with a desperate, frantic strength, as if she were trying to physically fuse herself to him, to ensure that he could never, ever leave her again. He was real, he was solid, he was warm, he was not a ghost. The sobs that racked her body were the sound of 4 years of unshed tears, of 1,000 lonely nights, of 1,000,000 unspoken words. It was the sound of a heart that had been broken into 1,000,000 pieces, finally, impossibly, and miraculously being made whole again. She breathed him in, the familiar, forgotten scent of him, a mixture of pine and leather, and something that was just uniquely, fundamentally Thai.
You're real. You're real. You're here.
She chanted the words over and over, a desperate, tearful mantra against the impossible truth of the moment. Ty held her, his own arms wrapping around her with a fierce protective power, his face buried in her hair, which smelled of sunshine and wildflowers, the scent of home. His own tears, which he had so stoically held back for so long, now fell freely, mingling with hers. He was holding his wife. After 4 years of a living death, of a hell he was only just beginning to remember, he was holding his Amy. The feeling was so profound, so overwhelming. It was a pain and a pleasure so intense they were indistinguishable.
I'm here, Amy. I'm home. I'm sorry it took me so long.
The rest of the Heartland family, who had been frozen in a state of stunned, disbelieving shock, were finally broken from their trance by the raw, undeniable reality of the embrace. Led by a weeping and deeply, profoundly grateful Jack Bartlett, they moved as one. They converged on the 2 figures in the center of the clearing, and the embrace of a husband and a wife became the embrace of an entire family. Jack's large, strong arms wrapped around them both, his own body shaking with a quiet, powerful sob, the stoic patriarch completely and beautifully undone.
My boy, you're home.
Lisa was right beside him, her usual elegant composure completely gone, her face a beautiful mess of happy, streaming tears, her hand resting on Ty's back. Lou, her pragmatic, in-control world completely shattered, just held onto her sister, her own cries a mixture of disbelief and a joy so profound it was a physical, aching presence in her chest. And Tim, a man who so rarely showed his own deep, vulnerable heart, just stood with his hand on Ty's shoulder, a single silent tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek. It was a perfect, messy, and deeply beautiful moment of a family being miraculously, impossibly, and completely resurrected. The wedding guests, who were silent, reverent witnesses to this sacred private moment, were all openly weeping, their own hearts breaking and mending in time with the family in front of them. The reunion was not a quiet, gentle thing. It was a storm, a beautiful, chaotic, and cathartic storm of a love that had, against all odds, survived death itself. The family embrace was a messy, beautiful, and profoundly healing thing, a knot of love and relief in the center of a world that had been thrown into chaos. But on the periphery of this sacred emotional circle, a very different kind of drama was unfolding. Nathan Price stood by the altar, a ghost at his own wedding, his carefully constructed world crumbling to dust around him in real time. The sight of Borden, a man he had paid a fortune to erase, standing here, alive, a solid, breathing refutation of his entire 4-year-long lie, was a catastrophic failure beyond his wildest nightmares. He watched the reunion, his mind a frantic, high-speed calculation of damage control. He saw the looks on the faces of the guests, the shock, the dawning, impossible understanding. He saw the look on Jack Bartlett's face, a look of pure, cold, and righteous fury that promised a terrible, inevitable reckoning. And he saw Amy, his Amy, the woman whose trust he had so meticulously cultivated, clinging to the man he had replaced, their two souls instantly and irrevocably, weaving back together as if no time had passed at all. It was over. He knew it with a cold, sickening certainty. The land, the legacy, the woman, it was all gone. His long, patient, and brilliant game had been lost in a single catastrophic moment. All that was left now was survival. His eyes, cold and calculating even in his panic, scanned the scene, searching for an escape. He saw his hired ranch hands, the men who had been his private army, now a disorganized, confused huddle at the edge of the clearing. Their mission had been to provide security, to keep the world out. They had not been prepared for the enemy to already be on the inside. They were looking to him for orders, for a sign. He gave it, a small, almost imperceptible jerk of his head towards the woods, a silent final command, abort, get out, now. While the Heartland family was completely consumed by their own profound emotional moment, Nathan began his quiet, desperate retreat. He moved slowly at first, backing away from the altar, his movements careful, trying not to draw attention. He was a snake, slithering back into the shadows. But he was not unseen. Tim Fleming, his own mind still reeling from the impossible, miraculous sight of Ty, was the first to break from the family embrace. His protective, fatherly instincts, always on a high alert, had never fully relaxed. He saw the movement. He saw Nathan, his would-be son-in-law, the man who had been a welcome, trusted presence just minutes before, now quietly, discreetly, and undeniably fleeing the scene. And in that instant, Tim understood. This was not a simple miracle. This was a crime, and the perpetrator was escaping. His voice was a loud, powerful roar that cut through the emotional, tearful atmosphere of the reunion. "Someone get him!" The shout was a starter pistol. The family, pulled from their emotional reverie, turned. They saw Nathan, no longer backing away, but in a full, desperate sprint for the edge of the woods where he had tied his horse. His hired men, their orders now clear, were doing the same, a disorganized, panicked retreat. But it was too late. The chaos of the moment was their cover. Nathan was fast, his movements fueled by the pure, raw adrenaline of a cornered animal. He reached his horse, untied the reins with a single frantic jerk, and threw himself into the saddle. With a final desperate look back at the wreckage of his own ambition, at the woman he had lost, at the ghost who had come back to haunt him, he spurred his horse and galloped away, crashing through the undergrowth and disappearing into the deep, concealing shadows of the woods. His men were right behind him, a small, fleeing army of disgraced mercenaries, their dark figures vanishing into the vast, unforgiving landscape. They were gone. The villain of the story had escaped, but he had left behind a scene of profound and deeply complicated emotional devastation. The joy of the reunion was now tinged with a new, cold reality. This was not just a story about a miraculous return. It was a story about a monstrous and still unanswered betrayal. The questions, the hows, and the whys of Ty's 4-year-long absence now had a face, and that face was a man they had all completely and utterly trusted. The abrupt, chaotic escape of Nathan and his men left a stunned, deafening silence in its wake. The beautiful, magical clearing, which had just moments before been the scene of a joyous, miraculous reunion, was now a strange, surreal tableau of confusion and dawning, terrible truths. The wedding guests were a sea of shocked, whispering faces, their minds struggling to process the impossible, whiplash-inducing events of the last 15 minutes. a furious grandfather, a bloody, beaten friend, and a ghost, a dead man, returned to the world of the living. It was too much. The Heartland family, who were still huddled together in the center of the clearing, were in their own state of profound, disbelieving shock. But their focus was slowly, inevitably, beginning to shift from the miracle of Ty's return to the monstrous, unanswered questions of his absence, questions that now had a single, sinister name attached to them: Nathan Price. But there were two people in the clearing for whom the revelation of Ty's identity was a completely new and even more devastating shock. Caleb, who had been the first to learn the truth, was still unconscious, being tended to by a frantic and worried Tim. And Ashley Stanton, who had only known the man beside him as a mysterious, bearded stranger named Benjamin, was now grappling with a truth so impossible, so utterly reality-shattering, that her mind simply could not comprehend it. She stood a few feet from the main group, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified disbelief. Ty Borden, the boy she had known, the boy who had been her sister's husband, the boy who had been a quiet, constant, and sometimes infuriating presence in her own tumultuous youth, was alive, and he was the man she had just spent the last 2 days rescuing, the man she had looked at with a mixture of suspicion and a strange, unsettling familiarity. The ghost was real, and she had just been his unwitting accomplice in his own resurrection. The sheer overwhelming and cosmic absurdity of it all was too much. Her legs gave out from under her, and she sank to the ground, a small, elegant heap of emerald green silk, her own mind completely and utterly blown. But the true emotional heart of the scene, the epicenter of this entire impossible day, was Amy. She was still clinging to Ty, her body trembling, her mind a chaotic, violent storm of 4 years of grief, of a new brilliant and beautiful hope, and of a profound and terrifying confusion. She had just gotten her husband back from the dead, only to have him arrive in the middle of her own wedding to another man, a man who had just been revealed to be a monster. The sheer, overwhelming, and impossible weight of it all, the shock, the joy, the grief, the guilt, the terror, the love, was a physical, crushing force. She looked up at Ty, at his beloved, familiar, and impossibly real face, and her own face, which had been a mask of pure ecstatic joy just a moment before, began to crumple. The adrenaline that had been holding her together, the sheer miraculous force of the reunion, finally completely deserted her.
Ty?
She whispered his name one last time, her voice a small, fragile, and breaking thing. And then, her eyes rolled back in her head, and she fainted, her body going limp, a dead weight of emotional and physical exhaustion in his arms. Ty, who had been holding her, his own mind a chaotic whirl, acted on pure instinctual love. He caught her, his arms wrapping around her, lifting her from the ground before she could fall. The moment was a powerful, poignant, and deeply ironic echo of a scene from just a few short weeks ago. Then, he had been a strong, capable man, lifting his injured wife, a hero in a moment of crisis. Now, he was a broken, battered, and hunted man, a ghost in his own life, and he was lifting his unconscious, beautiful bride, a woman dressed for a wedding that was not to him, a wedding that had been a monstrous, evil lie. He stood there for a long, silent moment in the center of the clearing, the weight of his unconscious wife in his arms, surrounded by his shocked, silent family. He was a tragic, heroic, and deeply romantic figure, a man in shabby, torn, and dirt-stained clothes, his face covered in a wild, untrimmed beard, a man who looked like he had been to hell and back, and in his arms his bride, a vision of an ethereal, sleeping beauty in her perfect, pristine white gown. He looked down at her peaceful, beautiful face, and a feeling of profound and fiercely protective love washed over him. The world around him, the shocked guests, the abandoned altar, the wreckage of his own life, it all faded away. The only thing that mattered was her, the woman in his arms, his Amy. He had come home, and he would never, ever let her go again. The scene in the wedding clearing was a study in surreal, silent chaos. The beautiful, romantic dream had been shattered, leaving behind a crowd of stunned, whispering guests and a family that was grappling with a miracle so profound, so impossible, that their minds could not yet begin to comprehend it. Ty stood in the center of it all, a silent, powerful anchor in the storm, the impossible, living proof that the world was not as it seemed. He held his unconscious wife in his arms, his gaze fixed on her peaceful, beautiful face. He was oblivious to the chaos around him, his entire universe narrowed to the precious, fragile weight of the woman he had just, against all odds, come home to. It was Tim Fleming who finally, with a deep, shuddering breath, took charge. He was a man who had seen his own share of rodeo disasters, of moments where a beautiful celebratory event had devolved into a scene of chaos and injury. He pushed his own profound disbelieving shock down and became the voice of calm, quiet authority. He walked to the front of the clearing and raised his hands, his voice a low, respectful, and deeply commanding rumble that cut through the rising tide of panicked whispers. "Folks, if I could have your attention for a moment, please." The crowd fell silent, their eyes turning to him, desperate for an explanation, for some kind of anchor in the surreal, unbelievable events of the last half hour. On behalf of our family, I want to thank you all for coming here today to celebrate with us. As you can see, an unexpected and deeply private family matter has occurred. And so we would ask that you please, quietly, make your way home. The wedding will not be proceeding as planned. We appreciate your understanding, and we ask for your privacy in this difficult time. His words were a masterpiece of dignified, understated crisis management. He gave them a simple, plausible, and deeply private reason for the chaos, a reason that would, he hoped, quell the inevitable, sensationalist gossip that was sure to follow. The guests, understanding and frankly completely overwhelmed by the sheer emotional intensity of what they had just witnessed, began to disperse, their quiet, murmuring conversations a testament to the unbelievable story they would all be telling for the rest of their lives. While Tim was managing the crowd, Jack and Lisa were managing their own, more immediate crisis. They rushed to Ashley, who was still sitting on the ground, a stunned, pale statue of an emerald green bridesmaid. "Ashley, dear, are you all right?" Ashley just looked up at her, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified disbelief.
Is that really?
It is, honey. It's him. It's Ty.
The simple, quiet confirmation from the patriarch of Heartland was the final definitive truth. Ashley let out a long, shuddering breath, the full impossible and cosmic absurdity of her own recent heroic journey crashing down on her. She had rescued her ex-husband's best friend, who was also, it turned out, her ex-sister-in-law's long-dead husband. The thought was so insane, so completely and utterly unbelievable, that she just started to laugh, a wild, slightly hysterical sound that was a mixture of shock, of terror, and of a profound and deeply weird sense of awe. The story shifts to later that night at the Heartland Ranch. The beautiful celebratory decorations from the wedding that never was had been quietly and somberly taken down. The house was profoundly, deeply silent, but it was not a peaceful quiet. It was the quiet of a family in a state of collective, massive shock, each member lost in their own private internal world of disbelief. Lindy, who had been whisked away by Lou at the first sign of trouble, had cried herself to sleep, her mind a confused, heartbroken jumble of a beautiful wedding, a scary, angry grandfather, and a strange, bearded man who everyone seemed to be crying over. Caleb and Ashley were in the Dude Ranch cabin, their own dramatic reunion, now a strange, complicated footnote in a much bigger and much more unbelievable story. They sat in a stunned, exhausted silence, the events of the last few days of their own capture and their miraculous rescue now completely overshadowed by the even more miraculous resurrection they had just witnessed. And in the main house, in the quiet, familiar sanctuary of the master bedroom, Amy was resting, a cool, damp cloth on her forehead. She had woken up a few hours ago, her mind a blurry, confused fog. And Ty had been there, a quiet, constant, and unwavering presence by her bedside. He had gently and simply told her the truth.
It's me, Amy. I'm here. It's a long story, but I'm home.
And she, her mind too exhausted, too overwhelmed to process the impossible, had simply and gratefully accepted it. She had just looked at him, her eyes full of a deep, profound, and unquestioning love, and had drifted back to sleep, the presence of her husband, a solid, real, and living warmth in the room, the most powerful and most healing medicine of all. Ty sat in the armchair beside her bed, a silent, watchful guardian in the darkness. He was home, he was with his wife, but he was still a stranger. A man with a 4-year-long hole in his life, a man who was the living, breathing, and completely unbelievable epicenter of a miracle that his own family, his own wife, was still struggling to comprehend. The reunion had happened, but the real and infinitely more difficult work of coming home was just beginning. The sun rose the next morning, a brilliant, almost defiant orange over a world that had been completely and irrevocably changed. The sky was clear, the air was crisp, and the Heartland Ranch in the quiet golden light of the new day looked exactly as it always had. It was a picture of serene, timeless, and pastoral beauty. But the peace was an illusion. The family inside the main house was grappling with the aftershocks of a miracle so profound, so earth-shattering, that it had completely upended their entire reality. The story had now inevitably escaped the private, secluded bubble of the wedding clearing. The 100 or so guests, who had been the shocked, silent witnesses to the impossible event, had gone home, their minds reeling, their phones buzzing. And in a small, tight-knit community like Hudson, a story that big, that unbelievable, that deeply personally and juicily dramatic was not a secret. It was a wildfire. The final scene of the episode is a quiet, powerful montage that juxtaposes the private, internal reality of the Heartland family with the new, public, and sensationalist reality of their story. We see a shot of the Hudson feed store, a group of old-timers in their usual corner, their morning coffee forgotten, their faces a mask of stunned, disbelieving gossip as they all stare at the front page of the local newspaper, the Hudson Echo. We see a shot of Maggie's diner, the place buzzing not with the usual friendly small-town chatter, but with a single obsessive and all-consuming topic. Every single person in the diner is talking about it, their voices a low, excited, and reverent hum. And then we see the paper itself. The camera zooms in on the front page at the bold, shocking, and sensationalist headline that has turned a private family miracle into a public, legendary event.
Miracle at Heartland. Ty Borden returns from the dead.
The story has broken. The private, sacred, and deeply complicated reunion of the Heartland family is now a public spectacle. The final shot of the episode is back at the ranch. Ty, clean-shaven now, his hair cut, looking more like his old self, is standing on the front porch. He is looking out at the long gravel driveway, his expression a mixture of a deep, profound, and quiet joy and a new, weary apprehension. He knows that the quiet, simple work of healing his family is about to be interrupted by the loud, chaotic, and prying intrusion of the outside world. He has just come home, and now the entire world is about to come knocking on his door. The episode ends on his face, a man who has just survived the impossible, now bracing himself for the next, and very public chapter of his unbelievable story.